And Andrea, give us your top lines from that briefing.
Well, he was fired. He was fired precipitously. He had a terrible tenure here from the State Department's perspective, not filling vacancy, cutting the budget 30% each year. But the way he was fired and the fact that he was much closer to Defense Secretary Mattis and in sync with European allies and others around the world in terms of a more traditional diplomacy, which arguably is a much better strategic outlook for the United States, means we're going to have big changes. They do not know whether Mike Pompeo, a very smart man with a much better relationship with the president, who can advocate for the State Department, will speak up to the president, will talk back to him, especially he and other cabinet members now know, assuming is confirmed, they all know what happened to Rex Tillerson for speaking back. Look, Rex Tillerson as the CEO of ExxonMobil was never a good fit. He was from the private sector, which has happened before, but he not only had no diplomatic experience, but he talked down to the president. He patronized the president. Famously, he called him a moron on July 20th at the Pentagon. It was overheard by enough advisors that we heard about it and reported on that in the fall. And then he refused to lie and say that it hadn't happened. He simply dismissed the questions about it as recently as a week ago. So this man was honest. He wouldn't lie. He talked back to the President of the United States in ways that others did not and still do not. He did not believe in blowing up the Iran nuclear deal, but modifying it, fixing it if possible, so that they would not be sending a signal to North Korea and rogue players elsewhere in the world that doing a deal with the United States of America means that you cannot trust that it will be obeyed and lived up to. Very important as we're going into negotiations with North Korea. Yeah. He was one of the original advocates, as you know, Katie, of diplomacy with North Korea, and then was undercut famously on Twitter again as he was flying back from Asia when the president tweeted, "You're wasting your time, Rex. Don't waste your time, Rex." So he didn't have the respect of others. He was others around the world because they knew he didn't speak for the president. That as well, he was upset after Charlottesville. He's an Eagle Boy Scout who hated that Boy Scout speech last summer that the president profanely gave to the Boy Scouts of America at the Jamboree. I mean, there are so many ways in which this man was not a good fit with this president, but was, you could argue, a much better advocate for what the United States needs to do in the world. And we do not know whether Mike Pompeo, a really smart guy, first in his class at Harvard, West Point graduate, will have the backbone to stand up to the president.
That's the question, Andrea. And Donald Trump is now just touching down in San Diego. We'll see if a reporter or near him once he gets off the plane. I don't think so. Andrea, that is the question, though. Will Mike Pompeo change Donald Trump on foreign policy, or will Donald Trump change Mike Pompeo on foreign policy? He's been very outspoken against Russia. He's called WikiLeaks a state sponsor, or I forgot the exact terminology, but he basically said WikiLeaks is not a friend. It's not a journalism organization, as Roger Stone wants to put it. Who's going to have more influence on whom? Is it going to be Pompeo or Trump?
Pompeo is a former member of Congress and a very smart one. He's a major player on the Benghazi hearings. He is a politician, as well as having done a very good job, arguably, by all reports from at the CIA. So there are two things here. He understands public advocacy. He will be much better at speaking in public, at doing television interviews, at talking to the press corps when it's a good purpose for the United States of America to travel with the press corps, as Rex Tillerson did not until very, very recently. So in that regard, I think as a former politician and not a former CEO of the world's largest private company, he is a better fit. But whether he is going to be able to influence the president remains to be seen. He has spent more time with the president than anyone else over these 14 months because he has been the briefer, presenting the president's daily brief in person, in contrast to many of his predecessors who would send a deputy. He did it mostly in person, and because this president does not read the daily brief in full, it was done verbally. So they have a very good chemistry.
Yeah.
He'll also, of course, if she is confirmed, have his